Hello.
So hello everyone, and welcome to today's seminars where we will launch the report of Meeting the Movement, looking into women, peace and security in 2025. My name is Marie Wikström. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of Kvinna, and I'm very, very happy to be here today and very happy that you all made it today. It's always a pride launching these reports that really gives a mirror of the work that we do together with our partners. So I would like to say thanks to everyone who's been involved in the process of producing the reports. And as always, Kvinna till Kvinna would be nothing without the partners that we work with and the support that we get from our donors. So a huge thank you to all of you. And Kvinna till Kvinna has been working within women, peace and security for over 30 years now. So we hopefully also bring a lot of experience to the table. I will keep it very short. Just super happy to have you here, and really happy to have wonderful panelists with us today that will talk through their work and experience. And I will hand over to Bridget to lead the way. But huge welcome, everyone.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry, I was just getting things set up. The momentary technology glitch. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Share. Hope everyone can see my screen. Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Okay. So welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to join you all today. My name is Bridget Rhinehart, and I will be moderating today's incredible panels. I'm an independent consultant in women, peace and security, and author of this Meeting the Moment report. But I'm not a stranger to Kvinna till Kvinna. I was the country director in Rwanda from 2019 to 2024. So it's been a pleasure to come back and support on this. Before we jump into our panels today, I want to give a brief presentation of the background and key points and recommendations from the report to set up for today's conversation. So why did we make this report? Women, peace and security, as Marie said, has been at the core of our work for the last 30 plus years in our long-term partnerships with over 100 women's rights organizations in conflict-affected countries. Today, women's organizations face greater risk with fewer resources, despite being central to community resilience and peace efforts. The report aims to bring partner voices and analyses to policymakers and to reconnect women, peace and security with today's realities and needs. We wanted to draw specifically on the flagship report that we did in 2020, which was titled A Right, Not a Gift. And that profiled women human rights defenders in 5 countries, including Armenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iraq, Syria, and Ukraine. And this report also focuses on the DRC. In most of the context profiled, unsurprisingly, the situation is not better than it was 5 years ago. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, anti-gender narratives are silencing women's organizations. In Eastern DRC, there's escalating conflict and suppression of free speech and human rights that has forced many activists to stop speaking publicly about sexual violence. In Iraq, women, peace and security was once proudly a civil society-led process, but has been turned into a tick box exercise controlled by the government. Activists who speak out face threats to their lives. And in Ukraine, women are playing leading roles in community response to Russia's full-scale invasion, but are constrained by rigid donor funding and lack support from broader feminist peace movements. In today's panels, we'll hear from speakers in Armenia and Syria, so I won't mention those further, but across all of the contexts, women continue to resist. They continue to organize, to document, to lead, but they're doing so under immense pressure. We encourage you to read the full report and to have a full picture of what's happening in real time and how we can meet the moment and revitalize the women, peace and security agenda. So just to give a very, very brief overview of the WPS agenda for everyone, there are 4 pillars of focus under WPS: protection, prevention, participation, and relief and recovery. WPS sits formally under the UN Security Council, which has released 10 resolutions on women, peace, and security since 2000. There are currently 113 national action plans for WPS held by countries around the world. As it encompasses many different aspects under the 4 pillars, there are different priorities from different actors and organizations. For example, women in armed forces, participation in peace processes, prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, just to name a few. In our 2020 report, we identified persistent obstacles to WPS implementation, which you can see here. They were identified by women peace builders and women human rights defenders, and they still hold true in terms of why it's difficult for women to participate in peace and security. Patriarchal systems, insecurity, and gender-based violence are hinders for women's participation. The agenda had weak accountability, which was a huge problem when the political will is not there from decision makers and the agenda is too narrow on what's considered peace-building work. In the Meeting the Moment report, the 2025 report aligns with the 2020 findings and shows that the WPS agenda is facing a critical moment. The promise of participation, protection, and prevention are being tested more than ever, and trust in the agenda is at its weakest point. Around the world, we're witnessing increasing militarization and a nationalist framing of security. Gender-based violence and conflict-related sexual violence are still widespread, and trust in international law and multilateralism is deeply shaken around the world. We also find that many national action plans remain symbolic and disconnected from women's real priorities, while anti-gender movements are gaining strength and actively undermining rights. Finally, the climate and environmental crises are deepening conflict dynamics and hitting women the hardest, yet they remain invisible. These findings are clear throughout the 6 contexts profiled in this report, and for women's rights organizations and women human rights defenders, they're operating under enormous pressure and it's not sustainable. Women are on the front lines supporting their communities out of survival and resilience. They're doing the work of peace building now and for the future, but it's often a long way from formal peace, transitional justice, or reconstruction processes. They remain systematically excluded from spaces where decisions are being made and increasingly under threat when they do speak up. International security architecture still very much sees women as beneficiaries or doers on the ground rather than as political actors. The report also takes a special look at the topic of environment and climate change, which Kvinna is increasingly engaging in, and actually next week we'll be launching their new brief on expanding the Women, Peace, Security, and Climate agenda. So we hope that you'll join us there. We can see that across the conflict-affected settings that we work in, environmental degradation and climate change are compounding insecurity. We're seeing soil degradation, deforestation, water scarcity, and pollution displacement that's linked to conflict and climate. Women in frontline communities are bearing the brunt of these crises, yet climate is still too often treated as separate from peace and security discussions. So integrating climate justice fully into women, peace, and security is not optional. It's essential to building sustainable peace. To truly move the women, peace, and security agenda forward, we need to go back to its core, ensuring that women have real power and influence in negotiations, transitional justice, and political processes. This means protecting alliances that have held this agenda together for 25 years. States, civil society, international NGOs, researchers playing different parts in WPS ecosystem. It's crucial for women peace builders in many conflict settings. We should acknowledge threats against women human rights defenders as early warning signs of democratic backsliding and of conflict escalation. Supporting activists is supporting peace itself. National action plans need to be more than words on paper. Civil society Participation needs to be genuine, long-term, and flexible support needs to be made available to local actors to lead and not just be consulted. Looking ahead, the agenda needs to tackle the new frontiers of insecurity, climate and environment, economic exclusion, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, all of which directly impact women's security and participation. So to wrap up, 25 years on, this is a moment to have a reality check, to focus on what really works. If we listen to women peace builders, back their leadership, give them the tools they need and the funding that they need, we can make the Women Peace Agenda matter where it counts. Thank you. So with that background, I want to jump into our first panel today on women peace builders and activists looking at realities on the ground. Our first panelist is Gretchen Baldwin, who's a senior researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. So Gretchen, as a researcher with SIPRI, you have extensive background in following the development of the WPS agenda with a focus on men, militarization, and masculinities, and how gender norms shape peace building. You very much engaged in this year's WPS anniversary events, having just returned from New York and Amman. So my first question to you is, reflecting on the outcomes of the WPS anniversary month, what would you say about the current moment for WPS with a focus on women peace builders and women's rights organizations?
Thanks so much, Bridget. I'm going to time myself over here. Yeah, so it's great to be here. Thank you to Kvinna and everyone who's put work into organizing this. I have indeed recently returned from what kind of turned into a WPS week in Amman, as well as WPS week in New York. And I'm actually speaking to you from Amman again for another WPS related event. So I'm going to try to consolidate some insights from these recent sort of strings of convenings. And just for a brief bit of background on what SIPRI's been doing, as Bridget mentioned, we've had 2 different convenings recently, small expert roundtables, closed door, on men, masculinities, and militarization and the WPS agenda, and how we sort of move forward on that topic. We also, during WPS week in New York, co-organized a climate and WPS panel discussion, as well as one on shrinking civic space. So I'll be bringing insights from all of these. I would say that an overwhelming takeaway of mine from these recent gatherings is that this is a moment to really have patience and take stock of where we are geopolitically. And Bridget, you just sort of framed it as a reality check moment, which I absolutely agree with. There are very, very real concerns about backsliding of the agenda. And while this has been present even since 2019, right, with the sort of contestation of the 2019 resolutions, I would say it's more serious now. And we really, really need to be cautious at a strategic level, particularly, and at a multilateral level. My impressions from New York were that there's still a solid amount of support behind the agenda, right? Political will is waning in some places, but does remain nevertheless. But I think civil society, researchers, member state champions don't necessarily know the way forward strategically. And my attempt at optimism here is that I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, right? Like, I think it's fine to not have, we all would have loved to be at a different place at the 25-year anniversary, right? We would have loved for Russia to not have the presidency of the Security Council and for Trump to not be leading the US. And you know, it would be great if we didn't have such widespread backlash against democracy and women's rights and. But that is the reality that we're existing in. And so it's okay to not have a really clear path forward and to really be checking in with each other more at the grassroots level. Another theme that came out from both Amman and New York is, and kind of tying into the state-related obstacles mentioned in the Kvinna report, hypocrisy in the international system, I think, is really coming to the fore at the moment, right? I really see that as having a negative impact at the strategic level on the WPS agenda. And what I mean by this, to maybe take an example from our Amman meeting, is with regards to this increasing militarization alongside very selective calls for demilitarization. The women peace builders that we brought together in Amman, many of whom are from Palestine, noted that this is not actually a long-term sustainable call, right? To say that only selective groups need to demilitarize, and that's actually then putting civil society really at odds with the agenda, right? Where like we do want a peaceful future, but if the states that are arming actors globally, right? If the main sort of actors within arms transfers are not also considering demilitarization, are not also sort of answering these calls, then it's really putting that hypocrisy at the fore. Finally, I think the current moment really makes it clear, more clear than ever, really, that we can't successfully implement the WPS agenda without taking a more holistic perspective on peace, security, and gender. And I feel very, very strongly that engaging men and boys is a really critical way to do this, and that's not at the expense of women's inclusion or participation. It's certainly not at the expense of women's specific spaces. And that's another really big thing that came out of our meeting in Amman, is that we want to engage men and boys. We want to consider men and boys as essential actors toward durable, sustainable peace, without, of course, again, sacrificing these spaces that civil society has worked so hard to carve out. So this looks like addressing root causes of conflict. It looks like engaging boys early on to address potential sort of socialization into militarization. And of course, it involves bringing men on as champions of the agenda, not just in name, but actually in practice. And I realize I'm over time, so I will stop there, but happy to expand more later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Gretchen. I'm actually going to stay on you still and kind of ask you a follow-up question, which you actually answered some of. So yeah, the Meeting the Moment report highlights several emerging issues that are reshaping peace and security. So climate-related insecurity, digital threats, democratic backsliding, as you mentioned, shrinking civic space. So in these, recent gatherings that you were in, what did these developments come up, and what does it mean for the future of WPS?
Definitely. So I think the beauty of some of these emerging issues, right, and the beauty of the WPS agenda is that I really do think it's applicable to basically any peace and security issue imaginable. I do also sometimes worry that we're going to spread thin, right? Particularly in this really constricted funding space that we're in right now. There's a lot of temptation to jump into new issue areas and sort of try to reinvent the wheel. And I mean, I say this as someone who sits sort of between civil society and policymakers, and I know my civil society colleagues have been beating this drum for decades, right? That don't reinvent the wheel. So we already have an implementation issue. I think we need to be very, not reticent by any means, but just cautious about jumping into new issues. And in order to do that well, I think really thinking through how the pillars can apply to these issues is essential. And so to briefly take climate as an example, and then I'll share a little bit on recent CIPRI analysis on shrinking civic space as well. So just to briefly take climate as an example, yes, the WPS agenda in all 4 pillars is extremely applicable to climate security concerns, right? But sort of flipping that around, I think climate and engagement on climate issues is, to me, actually the clearest way forward to promote the relief and recovery pillar, which is like the least attended to pillar of the WPS agenda by so many percentage points. Laura Shepard and Paul Kirby's book from a couple of years ago has like really specific data on this. And so I think climate change is such a great way to sort of elevate that pillar. This works to the benefit of sort of both sides of the issue, right? You're addressing climate-related issues from an inclusive perspective, but you're also amplifying the WPS agenda and its sort of dustier corners, maybe. And from there, right, if we sort of bring the relief and recovery element in, then necessarily you have, to me, a pretty clear connection then to prevention, which of course is very often linked to protection, right? So you really bring the pillars in quite well there. And then as I said, I just want to quickly share some CIPRI analysis on shrinking civic space. And we have a report that I put out recently on the future of conflict management that touches on some of these issues. I can put that in a chat maybe later if of interest. But so one of the things that I go into detail on there is that alongside the shift toward militarization and prioritizing military interventions over non-military conflict management, we're seeing rising threats to global civil society and civic freedoms. The sort of normative inclusion of global civil society and international peace and security over the last few decades. It's helped to bring the experiences of those most directly affected by violent conflict and insecurity to the attention of decision makers and policy spaces, and we cannot lose that. Again, as you know, I think most people on this call know, this is particularly true of women's rights movements and women's peace building efforts. And civil society is very much at the core of the advancement of the WPS agenda. Other essential norms such as democratic engagement, human rights, and state accountability. So now the trend that we're seeing across most of the world, much of the world, I should say, is for state consolidation of power, which is wresting access and inclusion away from civil society and civilian populations.
We're gonna have to wrap up soon.
Thanks, so sorry. Okay, so just very quickly to end on an optimistic note, as we lose this civic space, I think two positive trends we're seeing are youth-led movements that do often center around calls for economic and gender equality and other progressive values, Indonesia, Nepal, US, Kenya. And then the other positive trend that we're seeing is frankly, this flip from the so-called global north or global minority to the global majority and sort of reclaiming this space and reclaiming these normative agendas. And I can wrap up there. Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. It's very, very interesting. And thank you for bringing in the perspectives from these recent meetings that, you know, most people don't get a chance to attend. So it's great to hear that. Thank you. So our second panelist is Lubna Kanawati, Deputy Director for Women Now Syria. The report's chapter on Syria paints quite a chaotic image, I would say, with many challenges, including continued insecurity, women's exclusion from political participation and decision-making, but also some openings for women's organizations to expand and operate in the country for the first time since the war began, for example, in Damascus. Would you like to share some reflections on what the situation for women's organizations working for peace and justice in Syria is like now? And what does the Women, Peace and Security agenda mean for you here and now?
Thank you, Bridget, and hello all. And thank you, Greenwich. We were together actually in Amman, so it was good to see you again. Okay, I will start by saying that we in Syria, we witnessed a glory moment of shifting in political situation that's been stuck for decades in Syria, which were the 8th of December, the fall of Al-Assad regime. As the importance of this moments for us as Syrian, unfortunately, it came with the military winning. It didn't came after so many efforts of trying to push the political procedures or talks forward. So this impacts us as impacts the people who are in power now in Damascus. What we are facing now, it's chaotic also because there is no one situation to describe how we are trying to provide or to present ourselves as a feminist or as a women-led groups or women organization. But in total, if you look at the government now and the atmosphere, public atmosphere, you cannot see women there. We are very few, very selective. And this is a little bit frustrating for us because we've been there for every details in the Syrian revolution. We reply for every need, we respond to every crisis. But when the political gaining came, we found ourselves, we are not there. Even with the selective procedures that happened recently to the parliament, the selection of women were really very shameful. They couldn't exceed 5%. So it's very frustrating for women leaders and for women human rights defender, everyone for women politicians who've been putting all their effort also. So we still exist on the community level, on the social level, but not the political one, which is very also tough for us, because when we are talking about agenda, a formal frame to work toward peace, women, peace, and security, this does not exist in Syria. We don't have agenda implemented in Syria. We don't have national action plan. We don't have a frame to gather our efforts. So what happened now that we are like in the middle of a boiling pot, have to respond to everything happening in Syria, because it's the feminist responsibility to care about women's rights. And it's this very huge burden because a post-conflict era, it's a very difficult one. It's unstable. It's still suffering from all the violation that we've suffered before. We have a new violation have been committed, which is a major one. And it's specifically toward women, like when we are talking about sexual violence, about kidnapping, about and security for women. Women have those added to what they have been suffered before. And we suddenly found like this kind of isolation, like this field, it's not a national case. It's not a case that the government or anyone should care about. It's just our case. So it's difficult to see this agenda from that perspective. So we are there, we are on the ground doing everything we can do. We do the prevention and protection, but we are not in decision making. We've been excluded. We still excluded. We know nothing about what will happen to reconstruction. We will know nothing about what happened to the constitution now. Are we going to be part of it, or are we going to be selected also? And we don't know who will be selected to write this. Even that's, as Bridget say, that's please don't invent the wheel. We've been working for more than a decade on so many papers, or on gender sensitive constitution, on so many papers for also a lot of organization work on women, peace and security, national action plan. We work on something on GBV. So we have a lot of papers, but all this start to unfound. We don't know why we need to start all over. So there is spaces in Syria, a lot of it now, because we've entered the new location, but it's also selective. Like when we are talking now, we know that we have all these open spaces, but for example, Sweden is not accessible to us. Coastal area still facing a lot of violation, which make civil work in it very difficult, very secured, very observed. But women leaders, women-led initiatives still trying to do the work. We have our offices, we have our team, we still working, but it's just this absence of direction. Where this work going to take us? Is it going to take us for a better place, or it will just keep us in emergency response all the time? Response to emergency and the crisis. I'm gonna stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Lubna. No, I won't keep you talking for the rest of the time. So in this context, then, what are some urgent steps that are needed from international actors and donors to ensure that Syrian women's organizations can find their place and their way forward in this? Just briefly, in 2-3 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, I would second Grinch about the hypocrisy in the international system, because we face this too. We cannot talk about stability of Syria and we have Israel taking all the south of Syria, and there's as nothing happened. So people are supporting our activism in a side, and they just forget about what Israel doing and keep also weaponize this state. So this is very, really risky. At the same time, also, this new and sudden shift in the political situation put international organization, also feminist organization, who facing this cut-off fund in a competition with local organization in Syria, which is very, really risky situation. So now in Syria, we are having this international community plus the INGOs competitive us for fund, and they are running to registered and implement in Damascus, forgetting about all our experience in the past decade. So they are replacing us because so also the new government are welcoming this kind of existence in Syria. So now I guess we are in a very need of this solidarity that we've been asking about for the past decade. Like, please don't replace us. We still your partner, and to implement women, peace and security. This agenda should be localized, because in anything happen, in any escalation will happen in the country, we will remain, and international community usually leave at the first threats that happen. So we need to keep invest in local organization in grassroots level, so they will be the pillar for this agenda. And this is not just about channeling or funding. I do believe all the agenda is a political one, and this is come with the political will and the advocacy that those our partner or those state they have to influence the area, including Syria, of course. So it's not just, I really want to emphasize this, because people keep saying that it's, oh, there is a lot of money will come to Syria now. Okay, we know that there will be a lot of money coming to Syria, but if we don't have access, or we don't have a decision to take about this money, so this money will going for vain or for a shallow project. It's also, we need this money to give us, to keep our agency. That's, we really put a lot to get it all these years. And please, you can do a lot. Or everyone belong to international community, have access to their political leaders, that they can influence them to do something towards Syria. Because also we know that this fragile period that we are witnessing, it's probably gonna turn to dictatorship if we didn't interfere in the rights way, to keep our rights protected, and to really make sure it will present as a transitional period for Syria. So this is our only hope that we are working for, that's okay, we will transition to a better place, to a peaceful state for Syria, maybe hopefully with a political process this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lubna. Thank you for that. I want to move on to our next panelist, which is Lida Minasayan. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm correct. You can, yes, great. Lida is the co-founder of Women's Agenda Armenia. The Armenia chapter of the Meeting the Moment report highlights how ongoing security in the region, displacement, and militarization have deepened gender inequalities, created new barriers for women's participation in peace and decision-making. At the same time, women's organizations continue to advocate for accountability, social cohesion, and support to displaced communities, but often with very limited resources. So Lida, from where you stand today, what are some of the most pressing challenges facing women's rights and peace organizations in Armenia, and what role can the WPS agenda play in meeting those challenges?
Thank you so much, Bridget, and hello, everyone. My name is Lida. Of course, there are a lot of challenges that I can name, but I was trying to focus on few of them, and I have 4 of them that I want to list. First one is just to put a little bit of context on what I'm going to say now. In 2020, we had the second war on Nagorno-Karabakh. In 2023, we had massive forced displacements of more than 120,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. And then since then, the political situation was very volatile. And where we're finding right now is a lot of uncertainty. So on August 8th this year, there was a mediation process by US President Trump between Armenia and Azerbaijan that resulted in actually signing a declaration. But what we're finding very hard is, of course, this declaration is often mistaken with a peace treaty or peace agreement, which is not. This is just a declaration with some generally outlined commitments. But this is giving a lot of uncertainty for us because there is no any accountability mechanism from the government that provides how civil society can engage and advise this process. And it's very, very difficult to navigate this. Second, because there was no any format of how women or civil society can involve in negotiation processes, this is kind of the extension of while we don't know anything, there is no mechanism of how we can engage in this. And in a bigger context, there is a lot of work needs to be done in terms of narrative change, because while the situation can change any minute and this declaration does not mean anything, there is also this like seemingly situation or assumption that things are moving forward fine and we're in a good place, but quite contrary, there is a lot of narrative change work that needs to be done with the public on the one hand. Second, again, we don't know how the priorities of the governments would change after this. When it comes to narrative change, we're dealing with two very, very key deeply rooted issues, one being trauma, and trauma that comes from decades and centuries even. And there is no significant bottom-up and top-to-down approach of collective trauma healing. And second, what we're facing right now is a lot of Russian disinformation that is shaping current narratives and polarizing the population, which is making it very hard, especially we have parliamentary elections coming up in June 2026. So this is putting us in a lot of acute situation. And last area is, of course, funding, because all of this is in the context of major global funding cuts that when we need to name them. But what is most heartbreaking is that usually funding for peace building was tied to the crisis funding portfolios. It was very short term. And there was always this fleeting attention of funders, because whenever there is a context change, something emergency, there is this 6 months of quick response, or at least, I mean, sometimes it can last a year, but when it comes to deep long-term prevention work and recovery work, this is where we're seeing the gap. And this is usually the most invisible type of work, not producing very shiny results, but this is key, because response is, of course, crucial, but it's timely. What matters and what stays is the long-term work. When it comes to WPS agenda, so far it has been serving us well in terms of being a tool and a framework to hold the state accountable or engage in some sort of dialogue. But still, while it serves well in certain situations, it's not very effective. Plus, internally in Armenia, WPS agenda and the resolution itself is often criticized for not profoundly addressing the demilitarization, and it also creates space for even more militarization when we're talking about women's engagement. And this is a huge discourse we have right now, which brings me to this thought of, yes, we need to expand the scope of WPS, and it needs to be more inclusive of different gender diversities, like diverse women on one place, but also in general, different gender diversities and non-binary people, transgender people, something that is not really brought into the conversations when it comes to WPS agenda.
Thank you. So from your perspective, what are some of, and you've mentioned this a bit, but what are some of the most urgent steps that international actors and donors can do to support Armenian women's organizations at this point in time?
That's a very good question. Again, going back to the context and naming things that Azerbaijan has been living in authoritarianism for more than a decade now. And we've seen what happened in Georgia with the adoption of foreign agent law and civic spaces strictly being shut down. This is a very dangerous situation for Armenia right now, considering all the propaganda coming from Russia. So number one thing that could be done, especially in this current moment in time, is to support narrative change work and support peace building processes so we can actually hold it from civil society side. There can be a lot of non-funding related engagement in terms of creating spaces and dialogues where as civil society can engage in dialogue with our government, at least to influence the peace processes. However, there needs to be major rethinking of funding overall, not only because what I mentioned, moving from crisis funding to longer term funding, but also we cannot rely on philanthropy anymore that much. There is a lot of changes and turbulences that are going to lead to shrinking of civic spaces and very unhealthy competition in civil society. So there needs to be room created for inventing something new, inventing new funding models and letting civil society to try and experiment new things and not be afraid of failing. Because it feels like there is very little room in failing all the time. And this is also a conversation that everyone avoids to have. But yes, we need to fail to learn as well and to build something new, because there has been a lot of failure in WPS, in the way funding works. So we need to start with opening up very frank conversation in order to address all of these things. And overall survival, I guess, is the theme now, because we need to understand, especially in our region, when there is always this threat of new foreign agent law being adopted, Russian propaganda taking over. I guess survival is the key, and thinking of how activists working from exile could be supported. Because a lot of them, especially from Azerbaijan and again now from Georgia as well, are working from exile, and sometimes it's more effective than working from within the country. So these kind of things, which is not the only way, but sustaining the decades of hard work created by civil society is key, because when we stop, when there are gaps, then all of this is lost, especially considering what's going on.
Thank you, Leda. I just want to come back to each of you before we wrap up this panel, because maybe some things have come up as you've heard the others speak as well. But as we look ahead to 2025 and beyond, if you can provide one of all the things that you've mentioned today, one concrete step at the institutional or political level that you think could make the biggest difference for women, peace, and security in the next few years. Gretchen, if we can start with you, thank you. Just brief.
Yeah, so just two quick things. I would say don't capitulate to bad actors to set back these decades of work, as Lida just said. So without going into much detail, I have seen state actors capitulating early in multilateral spaces, particularly around inclusion of LGBTQ plus communities, which has been such a fight to get them included in WPS spaces in the first place. So do not capitulate to bad actors early or at all. And then I'd love to see more of a focus on an energy focus on state accountability at the institutional level. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Lubna, over to you.
I would say maybe invest more in the agenda and not in weapons, because weaponizing the area is killing us all. And I wish that we can hold Israel accountable, also all the dictatorship in the area, because we don't have to keep starting from below zero every 10 years or something. Thank you.
Thank you. Lida, last but not least.
Yes, I would say over the past 25 years, situation globally has changed so much. So we shouldn't be afraid of rethinking what WPS means, considering now we live in a totally different reality. And I'm going to challenge this even more with the AI development. This reality will change, and there is a whole new dimension of thinking how AI impacts peace and security. And therefore, one thing we should do is not be afraid of trying new things and opening up our horizons and letting go what proved not to be working. We don't have time for just kind of leaning on structures and processes that are not working anymore.
Thank you so much. I think this has really set us up well for the next set of panelists, and I'm excited to hear from them, because now we're going to, I guess, now shift and look at the policy perspectives for revitalizing the Women, Peace and Security agenda for 2025 and beyond. So our first panelist on this session is Kvinna Gurogil, who's Norway's Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security. So Kvinna, Norway has long been a strong advocate for women, peace and security agenda, both politically and through consistent funding for women's organizations and peace building work. Looking at today's global security context, with multiple crises competing for attention and resources, how can donor countries like Norway help to ensure that women, peace and security remains a concrete, well-resourced priority on the global stage, one that's effective in sustaining women's peace-building efforts on the ground rather than a rhetorical commitment? Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the first panelist. It's very interesting your presentations, and I really enjoyed it. I come from actually a feedback from yesterday, because Norway has we do have a national action plan that goes from 2023 to 2030, which is also aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. We have focused both on our international collaboration on women, peace and security, the normative work on women, peace and security, but also on our national commitments towards implementing women, peace and security back home, and with the reference to 2.3 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which we all should deliver on. So I think I just want to emphasize that as we in the past had a very much outward-looking focus on women, peace and security as something we assisted others with, if you might say so, that it happened other places. We embed women, peace and security a lot more into our own work on social cohesion, resilience, and total defense, and with the aim of sustainable peace and stability. I do think that is something that might have happened in other countries as well, as we do have a war in Europe. And as we say, when we protect Ukraine, we protect Norway. So it is a very important element that came in as we did the 2023-2030 National Action Plan. The other thing I thought I should say here is that it is a national action plan. And in some countries, I think civil society have played such a big role in women, peace and security, but it's not necessarily a national commitment. You have, for instance, like the women's movement in Israel have had a national action plan since 2013, but it hasn't been adopted by the government, right? So it's very important for us to underline that national action plans is also about the commitment from the 2004 call of the General Secretary to establish national action plans based on the UN Resolution 1325. So it's not, as we speak, it is actually 115 countries who have developed national action plans. And I emphasize this because we also are in a process of reforms and so forth. And I also noticed that CEDAW, of course, is about gender equality. It's a structure, but equally is 1325 connected to the Security Council, and they are working in parallel. I think that's very, very important, also for civil society to reflect on, so we don't end up with gender equality work only, but actually that this is also a matter of peace and security, and it belongs to the Security Council in 1325, as women's equal rights belongs to CEDAW. Two parallel systems that should have a lot of synergies, but still being kept as parallel systems. And we report to the General Secretary and to the open debate every year, right? So I just wanted to emphasize, I think that is something that is constantly. It was an ARIA meeting during the Women Commission, and it was about the role between CEDAW and the VPS agenda, and as I say, it is of course also about women's rights, but it is the vital role women play in global security and in resolving disputes and conflicts, and also responding to crisis. So I used a little bit much time on this, but I think it's very important to emphasize it. We can slide into a gender equality discussion only, which I think is very unfortunate, because it's a big theme in itself and important, but this is actually about that we want stable societies. So about Norway, so I said that we have had since 2023 we have had the National Action Plan. Now we have asked last year we asked a research institute, Norwegian Institute of Foreign Policy, NUPI, to conduct a status report on our current plan and how we do. They have been interviewing very many of my colleagues in different embassies, about 18 embassies, and then additional delegations. And we came up, they presented this report yesterday, so it's very new. And they have also given us a few recommendations. So they say that we should work on safeguard language and gender, and use various platforms and tools to continue promote the agenda, like NATO and UN Security Council. That means the wider, like from security to peace. And it says engage in principle and strategic discussions about how Norway should adapt in its women, peace and security strategies when faced with new realities. Geopolitical, as you mentioned. It's also about the contribution to raising the profile of women, peace and security agenda even higher. It's about continue to the ongoing work with institutionalization of its own organization. And this is very important because this is not just about finances. It's also about how we approach our commitment to 1325 through embassies and through focal point at embassies. And that means that a lot of my colleagues actually have quite a deep understanding of women, peace and security. I don't think that is the case in all countries. I'm alone. I don't have a team around me in Oslo, but I have my colleagues in all those embassies, which we call focal countries, but also all the delegations from NATO, OSCE, and all the UN delegations. We also have the same at the African Union delegation and ASEAN. So I think that's a great strength, because we shouldn't think about women, peace and security as a project, but it's rather an approach. And we need to mainstream it. We need to put it into every budget line. You know, how is this relevant for me working on global security? How is this relevant for me working on peace and reconciliation? How is this important for me when we are budgeting do the budgeting for South Sudan or Palestine or Jordan? You know, it's very important that it doesn't belong to one unit, but it's actually something that everyone needs to take into account. When Sipri was talking, I think yes, it's important with the recovery, but it's also very important with prevention, and maybe climate change and adaptation to climate change is one of those areas where we don't document as much as what's happening, because it's also a lot about prevention. And when things are not getting into a crisis, it's not being as visible as if when you avoid crisis, you are less visible. But actually, prevention is very, very important when it comes to climate change and adaptation. And I'm sure we agree on that. I just wanted to highlight it. I think also it's very important to remember that a national action plan is not one ministry's responsibility, and it's not just my minister's responsibility. In Norway, we have 6 ministers, which is have a constitutional responsibility to deliver on the government's plan. So it's the defense, justice, work and inclusion, equality, climate and environment, the Minister of Development and Foreign Affairs. And they create their policies and follow-up plans accordingly. So I am coordinating those ministries, but I'm not dictating the Ministry of Climate and Environment, but they need to come up with responses to the action plan that they have been in the working group to create, you know. So we include all of us into the working group of the action plan, and then we do follow-up plans according to our constitutional responsibility. And I think that is something that might be a little bit new, because climate change is a new area in this work. And what they have said is that in our plan it says that we don't have enough knowledge. We need to know more about it, and we need to educate ourselves, and we need to implement. So I think that is the first step, you know. So when it comes to, I just want to say
I'm gonna have to give you a time just to keep us on time. Thank you.
When I talk about resources, I just noticed that 58% of those reporting back to the compact of civil society organization, Compact of Women, Peace and Security, Humanitarian Action, have said that they have had cuts in finances. That's very alarming. And I think it is time to look at the division of labor and resources between local organizations and international organizations as well. It's very important to be at the front line and really to for instance, the emergency rooms in Sudan, you know, how do they get money? Well, through the diaspora, not necessarily through international partners, right? Or governments. So I think it's also a matter of the whole architecture on how we do aid. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you. We're gonna have final remarks as well. It's very, very interesting. I wanted to move next to Sophie Borrell from the Service Reform Policy Instruments at the EU Commission. So Sophie, the EU has been a key actor in advancing the women, peace and security agenda through its external action and gender equality frameworks. With discussions now underway on the next multi-annual financial framework and a new EU gender action plan, This is also a meet the moment for the EU to reaffirm its commitment that can also translate into impact on the ground. From your perspective, what should be the key priorities to ensure that the next phase of the EU programming and funding, including the MFF and the Gender Action Plan, genuinely reaches and empowers women's rights and peace-building organizations in conflict-affected contexts?
Thank you very much to Kvinna for inviting me. Thank you to all the speakers previously. It's a lot. I've taken a lot of notes, so that's the first step, is to take notes and to get that back into policy and hopefully into concrete funding. But I think, yeah, this is a crucial moment for us at the EU. A lot of soul searching. Obviously, we had the Gender Action Plan 3 that went from 21 to 27, so still ongoing, where Women, Peace and Security agenda was an integral part of that GAP 3, so that was already a step forward. But there is a sense from a lot of the champions here of WPS that somewhere along the line we have failed. We have failed a lot of women. And so we need to speak more from values rather than bureaucracy. We are a big bureaucracy, and it's that's a constraint in a lot of ways. But I have to say, I've been here for 6 years, and I've met obviously the local community. Women leaders they've been inspiring all along my 30-year career. But here at the EU, there have been some amazing people, I would say men and women, who have championed WPS. So we're trying to do a lot more. We have, as Kvinna knows, but a lot of maybe some of the people listening in, we have the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office here that had a meeting where we meet with civil society organizations working on peace building, and Women, Peace and Security was one of the thematics we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. So we are taking in the constructive criticism, and there is a lot, right? So just to go step by step, perhaps in terms of the priorities. The priorities is to change the way we fund organizations, because we have put a lot of organizations in competition against each other, including now with the localization agenda. Lubna, you're completely right. The way that Donors Fund is putting local organizations to compete against international organizations, and the playing field is not leveled for that. There's different constraints that different organizations face, and there is a role for everyone, right? So that's also to acknowledge that from all sides, but we acknowledge it, but we need to do a little bit better, a lot better, sorry, in terms of the way we finance organizations. So that's one thing. Also more flexible funding, so that needs to be built in. I mean, there's the policy, which is great, and Bridget, you were taking example of the beautiful national action plans in some countries that that are there. We can also have beautiful policies, but if we don't translate that into concrete action and into something that actually works for everyone, then we're losing. And we're all losing, men, women across the world. We are losing. So in terms of the way we fund, in terms of the flexibility of funding as well, there is a need for quick, rapid response. There is a need for longer term response. But what we need is really to build women, peace and security within our DNA, so that if it's rapid response, if it's longer term funding, WPS is there. The mainstreaming thing, we've been repeating it for years, and it has become a tick the box exercise. So the really building it in and strongly. So that means talking to our peers, talking amongst ourselves, trying to convince the unconvinced. I have yet to go to a meeting, a conference, an event where I'm surrounded by unconvinced people. We tend to speak amongst ourselves. So it would be great. Sorry, I realize maybe I'm running out of time. So more coherent, broader programs, and as a European institution here, what we want is a real team push for this. The door is open for Europe to champion this, and in a way that is supportive of countries who are right now in need of our support, of a different kind of support, especially with the backlash. I don't know if I have a bit of time still, or
yeah, you can keep going.
Yeah.
If you can also just touch on any like emerging trends as well around climate security and digital transformation. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so yeah, I think one of the interesting things I was hearing, obviously we have those statistics that peace agreements last longer when women are parts of them, etc. We keep on repeating that. I feel that it has lost some substance as we keep on repeating the statistics. So we need to now perhaps tell more stories that are more telling, and especially engaging young people. I think. So I did an exercise with my son. I have a 17-year-old son, and perhaps we can do this exercise just jointly. Just close your eyes and picture women and climate change. And what's the first image that will come to mind? It is the image of a woman carrying water from one point to the next. At least that's sort of the picture we get on TV. It's not a woman leader in terms of climate change. It is that. If you close your eyes again and you think of a leader in the digital tech sector, a man will come to mind more than often. And finally, if you close your eyes and think of a speech given by an inspiring peace figure, more than often, a man will come to mind. So that's what I mean by changing our DNA, is that women need to come to mind when we do, because they are there. It's not that they don't exist, is that most often they have been erased from history, or most often they are, and now especially, they're working at community level, but their voices are not being brought up. We've met a couple of days ago, we met women's organizations from Israel and Palestine, the ones that were at the forefront of the Mother's Call a couple of months ago. And they want us to support them, not necessarily with funding, but with the political push, because they don't have the space. They have no space. And that's something that the European Union can provide, is that space, that safe space for them to be able to speak out. So perhaps, I think that the chances for women to get to the political level, when they're carrying more than often the weight of their communities on their backs and they're unseen, the chances for them to be able to feed into or to design what early recovery, what the future looks like, those are the chances that we have to take today within the European Union, and that's how we have to build our programs. We are going in that direction, but what I would ask is for civil society to continue relentlessly putting the European Union institutions in face of that responsibility, because it is a responsibility. So we have fora like EPLO, but there's other ways as well. It's coming in, meeting high-level people here, and at our level, we can open those doors for continued demands, I would say, from women, for women, peace and security in all sectors, and not only on women's issues, but on the defense sector, on the security sector, and on the digital sector. We need to be a lot more present. Finally, I just to say that I had a meeting this morning with all of the EU member states to exchange on their programs today in terms of women, peace and security. There's quite a lot happening, and perhaps we are not good at communicating. When I say there's quite a lot happening, there's quite a lot of funding opportunities. They might not be the best. We might not have yet changed the way we do things, but there's still opportunities. So it would be great to have a way of relaying that to local partners, especially because the localization priority is embedded in a lot of the way that EU member states also are funding. But there is a momentum right now, and the backlash that has been very organized, perhaps better than us. Whoever is at the back of the backlash, they have been able to organize a lot better, to communicate a lot better than we have. So we have to surpass them in that regard. But I would say one of the positive things, and Gretchen, you were saying that we need to keep positive. I've been quite depressed lately with everything that's happening in the world. But there is perhaps one positive thing with the backlash, is that 25 years ago, perhaps some people thought, oh, the women are coming along and they want to be included. So we'll have either quotas or we'll include them here and there. And then I think some of them realized that it's a highly political issue, because you are transforming a power dynamics and power relations. And so the fact of this backlash coming so strong is because there's a threat and they feel the threat. And so well, I'll keep it for my last word then. My last word.
Right. No, that's good. That'll be a good last word. Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting, inspiring. I've taken note. So our last, but certainly not least, panelist is Javiera Thais Santa Cruz, who is the advisor on gender issues for OSCE. So across the multilateral system, we're seeing growing crises of trust between states, between institutions and citizens, and even within international organizations themselves. This affects not only peace and security efforts, but also the ability to advance an inclusive agenda like WPS. From your perspective, what are some approaches at OCSE that have proven effective in keeping gender equality and women's participation central, even when political consensus is fragile and there's dwindling trust in the multilateral system?
Thank you, Bridget, for the invitation and the question. I want to first share my solidarity with Sophie on how depressive the current situation is on so many fronts. I feel many of us have this feeling, especially those of us working on advancing women's equality and rights. So one thing I always try to remind myself of, not to feel so frustrated in certain areas of my work, is that international organizations can only be as good as the countries that make them. And regretfully, we can only be as forward as the least forward of the countries that are part of it in many cases. At least in the OSCE, this is the case because we work by full consensus. Now, having that said, I think there's many ways in which, in this case, the OSCE can contribute or support the WPS agenda. And I think one of them is to focus on a broad concept of security. So we cannot keep talking about security as the absence of war or the absence of conflict. We need to have a human security approach. And we need to view security as having access to justice, to education, to health, because ultimately the root of all wrongs is inequality. Then I think another important work, in a way, of international organizations and of the OSCE is to be a neutral platform for dialogue. Now, I know this is very hard to think at the same time when you think so many countries make up these organizations, but if you take the neutral space that is provided by that, it really does give you a space where you can bring together a lot of different people. Starting with, and this is a constant effort, I think, civil society organizations, because I don't think we can move anywhere unless we involve them. I think there's also the aspect of integrating different gender perspectives into all of our work. So let's not just think about how gender and conflict relate, or the triple nexus. Let's think as well as how gender and conflict and the WPS agenda relate to climate, relate to digital spaces, relate to economic empowerment. Sophie, I mean, most of the panelists actually have mentioned the very important link with climate. And of course, I mean, climate justice requires gender justice. And if women are not involved from the beginning, it's just not going to work, because women are the ones who bear the biggest brunt of climate change, but they're also the ones that have access to, although not fairly distributed, to the work in these kind of areas. So that's a second issue. Another thing is, with these platforms that we have, it is important that we give spaces in these platforms, that we provide platforms to civil society where they can present their priorities, express what their main challenges are, and what they need. They need to educate us on what they need, and they need to educate us on how to give it. We cannot come with the assumption that we know how to do these things. From our experience, some of the issues that have proven effective on this is to really frame the WPS agenda as a security imperative, not just a human rights one, a principled one. It is all of those things, but in practical terms, which is what many people focus on, regretfully, it is a matter of making something efficient, making something work. And if we are not sure to involve women, especially women from civil societies, from the beginning, then it's not going to be effective. Easy as that, and I think that is usually the line that works best with male-dominated institutions. And backing it up with evidence. I think creating, backing up, gathering evidence is also another way of putting it there. It's also about building relations. I mean, building relations between dividing lines or parties of a conflict or of a. I have a very concrete example of one of our programs, which is based on leadership. We had two participants that were coming from, one of them from Armenia, one of them from Azerbaijan. And they actually ended up to be the closest ones who keep advocating for joint solutions, for a joint vision of how things should move forward. And these are the women that I personally try to bring forward every time we have discussions around that area, because I think the example is so powerful. Then it's building relations of civil society with, in our case, what we call our participating countries and their delegations. Put people in contact together, let them speak, bring the American delegation with American civil society organizations working on climate, working on this, just bring them in the small space we have in our case in Vienna, and bring together peace leaders or peace builders or civil society that is actually the main peace building actor ever, together amongst them to create a common force from diversity, benefit from that diversity and move it forward. And finally, because I know the time is short, I would just like to replicate what, I'm not sure if it was Sophie or Lida who said it, but to document and share success stories. If we can actually show that they're there, and they are, I think PR is really one of the things we're not strong at, and we need to become strong at, because if it's there, if it's out there, if we keep repeating it, if we show the benefits, people start putting it in their agenda. It starts becoming part of their head. So, we need to shift that narrative as well. And I will leave it at that, because I don't want to get all the time. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was, I think, a really great way to sum up a lot of what we've been talking about. So I want to just give each of the last three panelists an opportunity for some final remarks. So yeah, our report highlights the alliances within different actors of the WPS community. And you were just talking about this, Javier. We need to build relations as a key for implementing and building and sustaining peace. So if you could send one message to your fellow policymakers partnering and working on WPS with you, what would it be? What do you see as the most important area for collaboration moving forward? Maybe we can start with Signe.
Just try to find the buttons here. Well, I think, first of all, I would say that this is women, peace and security is a global agenda. One of the rhetorics of Russia is that this is a Western agenda, but it's actually Namibia who brought this to the Security Council. African Union as a continent, they have a follow-up mechanism of women, peace and security of all member states. They have a result framework, and they report back to the African Union every year. ASEAN also have a regional national action plan for women, peace and security. We don't have such a mechanism in Europe. I think that's something that is worth emphasizing, that actually we have also African Union, we have ASEAN, we have member states of African Union who have doing quite advanced work in this area, and that we can also relearn a lot from our partnership with other countries. This year we have been sharing the focal point network of women, peace and security. It's 96 member states, 10 regional organizations. We have done some with Japan. It was the first time that they had a focal point network meeting in Asia. But I think it's really important to demonstrate this global outreach of 1325 and the fact that it's 115 countries who have national action plans. And that's somehow more or less dedicated plans to follow up on a UN resolution. I think also it's important to just to say, that it's nothing that proves that keeping women out of processes has been very successful. We have so many conflicts these days, but we constantly have to prove that it has a benefit to bring women into processes, right? That's to turn it a little bit upside down, because where we are really lagging behind is women in political solutions and processes. And nothing shows that to keep women out is a smart way of doing peace work. So I think that's important to emphasize. I think Osse is a good example. She will talk later, but it's actually a very good example on how to work on women, peace and security in such an alliance, also with young generations. I think we need to build down this gap between established women organization and young women, and youth women security, women peace and security, and also because of the funding mechanism, which we shouldn't keep putting groups against each other, but rather see how we can maximize our work, with intergenerational perspectives, co-leadership and so forth. And as I said, also I just want to highlight the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Kvinna to Kvinna have been part of the steering committee there. Now it is also in Women to Women International who are there. I think it's for us, at least as a donor, it's very interesting to sit in a fund which has both UN organizations, donors, and civil society organizations who decide as a board, and that it's hybrid. It doesn't belong to one organization. It's actually a board who do some of the decisions. And I hope that the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund also can be encouraging for organizations like the UNHCR, which is now the head of the board. Because that's also where now they have been reduced, but I mean, when you come to humanitarian response, it's also a matter of how to tap into this big mechanism of OCHA and UNHCR and IMO and so on. I think it's difficult for single countries to reach out locally. It's really 1% to local organization. That's a very, very modest aim. And it's difficult to reach that. So we need mechanisms that can really jumpstart and be efficient in providing the shift to local organization. And also then platforms of international or local organizations where you see this real partnership and what can I say, the added value of that partnership rather than local organization being service deliveries of international organizations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us today as well. I want to go to Sophie
and
next.
then I just want to say that Sophie, being in the European Union, you have at least you have a big group of colleagues, so that's a benefit.
Sophie, over to you.
Depends which colleagues. I'm just kidding. No, I do. We're a good team. But so last words for me. We need each other. We need to stand together. It's funny because in these settings we often speak about what binds us. Again, we probably have differences, and this is I feel we need to speak a little bit more on our different approaches, and maybe have good, interesting debates about that to shape better what we'll be doing going forward. But I also think we need to be there to stand together to ensure that leaders today, and a lot of them are not showing a very good example, that we make them honest. If they are honestly speaking about peace, then I don't see any reason why. There is absolutely no justification that they don't get up, leave the seat, and leave the space for women. Because we have years and years of non-violent movements to counter inequality, to counter the violence that is perpetrated against women and girls, and to counter exclusion. So we have a wealth of knowledge on how to make peace, and I feel we need to keep them honest by asking them politely to get up, stand up, and leave us the seat at the table. But for that, we need really to stand together, and protection is crucial. I'm just again imagining women at community level again with everything that we're putting on their backs, right? Because Women, Peace and Security Agenda has done that as well. It has weighed heavily on a lot of women's shoulders in terms of everything that they're supposed to be doing, plus facing the threat of harassment and sexual violence. So that burden is extremely heavy, and I hope going forward into the new MFF and with the new Gender Action Plan 4 that we will concretely alleviate the burden on a lot of women at community level and women leaders across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Javiera, over to you.
Thank you, Bridget. I fully agree with what Signe and Sophie said. So I'm going to take a very practical little thing that I think can make a world of a difference. So my message would be invest in women's networks. Because I think when you provide a safe space to develop capacities, to generate exchanges, especially intergenerational exchanges, and when you provide platforms and you provide peer, or you give the space for peer-to-peer support, I think, and I've seen in my work, that these really work like miracles. The amount of voice that you, and not you as an organization, that you as a network can give a member of your network is invaluable. And I think that's also giving them the voice. So we can create the space and we can support if there's capacity development needed or whatever need there is. But they are in charge. They know better than all of us. So that's what I would really say, like, invest in women's networks.
Thank you. Thank you. Marie, hi. Signe, sorry, did you want to come in again?
No, I just wanted to show my face before we leave.
Okay, all right. I saw.
But
Okay,
no, very
good.
happy to listen to you all. It's been great.
Yeah, so we're at the end of our time. I thought we might have some time for some Q&A, although we don't have any in the chat box at the moment. It's probably because you've left us all speechless, the panelists. I have taken extensive notes as well, as I'm sure the team at Kvinna and will be, able to provide a summary of some, very, very important points that were made today. So let me just conclude by saying thank you so much to the panelists for your time today. The Meeting the Moment report is available on the Kvinna website for you to read in full if you haven't already. We got just a snapshot into two contexts today, Syria and Armenia, but imagine, you can get that kind of snapshot into other contexts as well. And I think we need to ground our way moving forward in the realities of women that are working in these contexts. So a recording of today's webinar will also be available and sent to anyone who's registered for the event. So yeah, thank you last but certainly not least to everyone who has attended, who is listening in right now, for your interest and passion on this topic. We hope that one or two things that have been said today will stick with you and carry you forward in the important work that you're doing. I wish you a wonderful evening. And Marie, I don't know if there's anything else you would like to say. But from my side, thank you so much. It's been an honor, really, to be your moderator today. And over to you,
Bridget, you did a fantastic job. So thank you to you as well for guiding us through this this seminar. It's been, for me, very, very good to listen to you all. I think there's a lot of points that have come up, and the way we need to continue to work on the women, peace and security agenda, despite the backlashes and hurdles. There are a lot of good things being done, and it can be even better. So thank you all for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. I will also put the link to the report so you can easily find it as well. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to our audience who's joining in with us today. Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.